Good afternoon and welcome to the first webinar of the ELIMED webinar series, which is a product of the collaboration of ELIAMEP, the Hellenic Foundation for European Foreign Policy, and Medyascope. Medyascope and ELIAMEP are joining forces in order to contribute to a more pluralistic, more diverse debate on a number of topics that are important for Turkey and its neighborhood. The ELIMED project consists of 7 75-minute webinars in the format of roundtable discussions, which will be followed by 7 policy papers summarizing the key points of these discussions. We will start today with the first in that series, and this first webinar will be focusing on Turkey's pivot to Eurasia. I will be the moderator of this event. My name is Ioannis Grigoriadis. I am an associate professor at Bilkent University and head of the Turkey program at the Hellenic Foundation for European Foreign Policy. And I'm honored to be joined by 3 distinguished speakers who have done research on Turkey's relations with Eurasia and Eurasian actors as well. So within our webinar today, we will touch upon important issues that reflect on Turkey's foreign policy, Turkish identity, and Turkish economic relations with a number of Eurasian actors. In that respect, Russia's invasion of Ukraine has added a very important and very sort of critical dimension to our discussion. When we had discussed to introduce this topic, this parameter was not there. So we will definitely look into integrating the dimension of the invasion of Ukraine into our discussion. We had actually invited an Ukrainian colleague, Dr. Evgenia Gaber, who had initially accepted to participate in our webinar today. Evgenia is a non-resident senior fellow at the Center in Modern Turkish Studies, Norman Paterson School of International Affairs at Carleton University, but unfortunately she had to cancel her participation in the last minute. But we do have 3 very distinguished speakers with us today. Let me introduce them to you, and then I will give them the floor. And then, of course, we'll have the opportunity for discussion. We'll start with Dr. Habibe Özdal, who is an assistant professor in international relations at Istanbul, Okan University. She has her research has focused on Russia and Eastern Europe, with particular reference to Russian domestic and foreign policy, Russia-Turkey relations, and Ukraine politics. And she has also carried extensive fieldwork research across the region, including Russia, Ukraine, Georgia, and Kyrgyzstan. Then we will give the floor to Professor Shaban Kardash, who is working at TÜV University in Ankara. Professor Kardash is a faculty member at the Department of Political Science and International Relations there. He has published extensively on Turkish domestic and foreign policy, human rights, energy policy, and international security, and has been an occasional contributor to Turkish and international media on Eurasian affairs. Our third speaker will be Mr. Suat Kınıklıoğlu, who is a former member of the Turkish parliament, and he was until recently a fellow with the German Institute for International Security Affairs, the SWP. Before that, he used to be an academic visitor at Oxford University St. Anthony College Middle East Center, and he was also a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress in Washington, D.C., as well as a resident fellow at the Institute of Politics at the University of Chicago, where he delivered lectures on Turkey. He served in the Turkish parliament from 2007 to 2011, and he has recently concluded a long study on Eurasianism, so he will be in a very good position to address the issues we will be discussing here. When I thought of the topic of Eurasia and Turkey's pivot to Eurasia, I was referring, of course, to the whole debate about the rise of post-Western world, the fact that the focal point of global demography and economics is shifting from the West towards the east, towards Asia, China, India, the Pacific. So in that respect, this, of course, puts certain trends into move and raises certain discussions and debates in a country like Turkey, which has a very strong Eastern identity, but it has been trying for centuries to become an integral part of the Western civilization and the West as a whole. So in that respect, does this rise of the Asian age mean that Turkey will reconsider its relations with the West? And if yes, up to what extent? Is this going to challenge its position within NATO, within Western political, economic, and security organizations? Or will this become an opportunity for Turkey to stand in between the two worlds and try to maintain its identity as a Western country? So, and how does the war in Ukraine, Russia's invasion in Ukraine, play into that? So I will start our discussion by giving the floor to Dr. Özdal, who can hopefully tell us a few more important points about how Russian-Turkish relations are featuring into this debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure for me to join you with these very distinguished speakers. And I believe the topic is quite interesting indeed, since the Russian military aggression, Russian invasion of Ukraine, this opens a new page in terms of international system, in terms of new norms, or whether this UN system, which was established right after the Second World War, is going to continue. I mean, this is a huge challenge indeed. It doesn't only affect Turkey, but Turkey definitely is one of the countries that was to be affected mostly. So probably that was the reason why, from the very beginning, it wanted to initiate such a mediating role. But at the end of the day, it wasn't possible to stop Russian aggression. And here we are. In order to understand how this current development is going to affect Turkey, Turkish foreign policy, Turkey's relations with Russia, and of course, Turkey's relations with the West, referring to your question, whether this is Turkey's, I mean, this has been asked for a while, whether this is Turkey's pivoting to Asia from West, I would like to start with a very brief, I will use my time properly, hopefully, but I still need to focus a little bit on the background of Turkey-Russia relations in order to put it in a right way. So from the very early 2000s, actually, to the maybe later half of 2010s, I mostly see that the rapprochement with Moscow had been driven by a multidimensional foreign policy on Ankara's part mainly. That was looking for closer ties with Moscow as a balancing factor vis-a-vis the West, vis-a-vis the Western world. What I'm trying to say is that in the early 2000s, actually, Turkey was attempting to establish balanced, mostly complementary relations with both West and Russia in line with this multidimensionalism. Constructivist foreign policy, pragmatic foreign policy, those were the main natures of the Turkish foreign policy. However, there has been anti-Westernist sentiment as well later on accompanying this multidimensional foreign policy that brought Turkey and Russia together. I do remember in 2006, for the first time I saw the article written by Fiona Hill and Ömer Taşpınar, whether Russia-Turkey axis was the axis of excluded. So at the beginning, even though it started as a multidimensionalism, later on we have seen sometimes a sentiment of anti-Westernism as well. By the time passing, when I've said early 2000s, to, almost the later half of the 2010s, by the time passing, we have seen Turkey's relations with Russia, with United States and European Union deteriorating. And the more relations deteriorated, more closer Turkey became to Russia. And this also has something to do with the domestic politics as well. President Erdogan had several domestic political reasons for being more accommodating to his Russian counterpart, and domestic factors. When I mention domestic factors, one needs to address a specific development, 2016, a coup attempt in Turkey, definitely, and I still believe it still affects Turkey's relations with the United States, political unwillingness of US and European Union to politically support President Erdogan created a huge trust deficit, still is in play, while Turkey's relations with Russia at that time were diplomatically almost in a lowest level. Still, President Erdogan called for a support. President Putin called for a support to President Erdogan. Having said that, let me also mention a little bit what is the current state of relations, because even though since 2010 or even prior to that, it was suggested or it was asked whether Turkey is shifting from west to east, whether this is a shift in foreign policy. It is hard to say that Turkey's relations with West are replaceable when we consider Turkey's relations with Russia, the nature of it, or let me say, the strengths and weaknesses of bilateral relations between Turkey and Russia. What I'm trying to say is that, yes, those two states, Turkey and Russia, they are led by very assertive leaders who almost enjoy limited political power in their respective countries. But there is also an ongoing nature of relations. Still, we don't talk about strong institutional foundations. While on the other hand, Turkey's relations with the United States, Turkey's relations with the European Union, even though they have been deteriorating for such a long time, still we may find out some institutional relations. So rather, when we look at Russia-Turkey relations, what we see is they rely heavily on the personal dialogue between President Putin, President Erdogan, which is unfortunately not that much capable to solve specific problems as we have witnessed during the warplane incident. Even after 2016, even after the coup attempt, when relations with West deteriorated in a very important manner, and Turkey's involvement in Syria also brought very close Turkey to Russia. Even after that, what brought Ankara and Moscow together was not common interests or shared values, but rather necessity of working together. So this is another reason why I believe Turkey's relations with West are not replaceable by Turkey's relations with Russia. As long as we don't talk about common identity, common interest, common threat perceptions, or common idea of common worldview, not only regarding to a region, but in a broader sense, in terms of international system, what I see is, currently when we look at a picture of Turkey-Russia relations, this is, mostly written. Many analysts have already wrote about this. This is cooperative rivalry. This is adversarial collaboration. What we see is both cooperation and rivalry at the same time, because there are many topics where we do see Turkey, Russia cooperating on one hand, but also they do support different sides of the conflict in some other cases. The Syria, even though seems for a very long time seemed an area of cooperation, it still includes specific potential crisis, potential risks. Libya is another case where we do see a totally different policies, national interest. Another feature of Turkey-Russia relations is that, as we have seen in case of Nagorno-Karabakh, Ankara-Moscow relations never had a problem-solving capacity, even when the political dialogue was intensive and the connection was very strong during the 2000s. Ukraine has been definitely another area where we have seen diverging interests of Russia and Turkey. And finally, we have seen this, unfortunately, invasion of Russia in Ukraine. Now, traditionally, Turkish foreign policy on Ukraine, it's been a mix of deterrence and a dialogue towards Russia. From the very beginning, Turkey criticized the annexation, never recognized it. It's been vocally criticized by President Erdogan, in a very highest level in different platforms. Potentially, potential hostility between Russia and Ukraine was very unwanted development for Turkey. So therefore, Turkey wanted to play a mediating role, which wasn't possible. 2 weeks ago, prior to the war, Moscow was a little bit critical towards Ankara's position, because I will go in detail that Turkey and Ukraine had a specific cooperation when it comes to defense industry. But in 2 weeks, it seems like at least Prime Minister Lavrov's existence in Ankara, in Antalya Diplomacy Forum, attendance, participation, even though it didn't really brought up specific results, still it gives us a signal that Turkey's position is balanced, at least. It didn't up until now harm that much its relations with Russia, but this is a very, very sensitive balance, which we will see how Turkey is going to continue. So from the very beginning, this potential hostility was very unwanted because, of course, because Turkey-Russia relations, which goes back to early 2000s, they're very complicated. Interdependence is so high, sometimes in economic manner, even though this is in favor of Russia still. Russia is an important regional player, an important political power, looking from Ankara, looking from Turkish foreign policy perspective. Economically, this war, this direct aggression of Russia in Ukraine also brings an important cost for Turkey. What I mean is that Turkey sought to expand its trade commercial relations with both Russia and Ukraine. Turkey is a very important destination for Russian tourists. There are like almost 6 million Russian tourist visits last summer, almost 2 million Ukrainian tourist visitors last summer. Russia is also a very important importer of oil and gas. So the extent this war may affect the ties and drives up energy prices, those were sort of the harm, the damage Turkey wanted to prevent, but it was not that easy, of course. It's not an easy task for any state, be it Turkey or Israel, to mediate or to prevent such a war. So economic considerations definitely have been a driver of Ankara's policy, one aspect of it. When war has started, of course, Turkey called this as a war, and that is very important to understand, because once Ankara called it as a war, that also gave right under the Montreux Convention to close Turkish straits, as it did. In short term, those restrictions may not that much affect Russia, to be honest, because it has the naval dominance in the Black Sea, plus the preparations were made in foreseeing such step to come. But if war continues, then we may see some pressure, maybe in order to push Turkey, or in order to test Turkey's stance on these Montreux Convention implications. Another very important pressure that Turkey is going to face is probably regarding to the sanctions. When EU and United States previously introduced sanctions right after the annexation of Crimea, Turkey didn't really implemented those sanctions, but the message that time was clear to the mostly European Union. The clear message was that actually, Turkey not being able to participate to the decision-making process, staying out of the decision-making process, raised its concern that it doesn't really feel responsible to implement them. But now, Ankara indeed may forced to abide by the consequences, because we've seen more tough position from the European Union and the United States, even though this is, interdependence means all those sanctions are also creating a huge damage to European economies as well. So here we may see from Turkey to show its Westernness, in order to show the unity of Western world against this very challenging foreign policy decision of Russia. Now here, the timing was quite crucial, because Turkey, on the one hand, found itself in the middle of the war when its relations with West, Biden administration, the new administration, but didn't really brought any positive developments in order to overcome the tenuous relations on the one hand. On the other hand, economically, it's not only Turkey, but Turkish economy is much more vulnerable. It's not only due to the pandemic and its economic conditions, but it is much, the inflation rates or the value of Turkish lira. Those are uncomparable with those of European rates of inflation, etc. So the timing, both in political and in economic manners, has been really quite crucial, and it's not in favor of Turkey. The conditions that Turkey found itself are not so, let me say, favorable at that time. Now, some suggest, when I said I don't believe Turkey's relations with West, Turkey's relations with Russia are comparable because they don't have institutional backing, looking from Turkey-Russia relations perspective, but also there is no common identity, common interest, common perception, which, you know, we may talk about alliance. What I may call Turkey-Russia relations at almost is a multidimensional partnership. Sometimes we talk about strong relations, political dialogue, but it's very, to be honest, it includes many risks, and relations are very fragile. So therefore, even though I don't believe that those relations are comparable, still, as Ioannis, you actually mentioned at the very beginning, we have to also bear in mind that all that discussion has started so much in line with the discussion about this post-Western world. The economy was shifting from west to east with the rise of China. Let me also remind you that in 2011, Turkey was 19th biggest economy, so it was also in a group of MIKTA states. So the rise of BRICS, MIKTA, also brought Turkey in a group of states which were challenging Western dominance. So if we all think about this anti-Westernism, or, you know, with President Erdogan's very famous saying that the world is bigger than five, strategic middle powers like Turkey, you know, having this economic strength also initiated to raise their hand in the world politics. So therefore, we also may think about Turkey-Russia relations in that sense. But again, the nature of relations have never been that strong enough to talk about Turkey's shift from west to east. But I do understand, because sometimes we have seen not wrong images, but complicated messages from Turkish foreign policy. The purchase of S-400 missile defense system is definitely one of them, which created a huge criticism within NATO, and that also raised the question whether Turkey belongs to a Western world sector. So I do understand the question. It has meaning. But the answer for me, looking from my perspective, definitely this is not a total shift from west to east. Let me try to finish at least this round by saying that now Turkey's relations with Russia do consist both continuity and change since 2000s, both in terms of, you know, potential cooperation. We may see on some specific areas cooperation will continue. This is inevitable. But on the other hand, even though there are specific areas like Syria, Libya, Nagorno-Karabakh, when these competing, engaging, you know, the dialogue and cooperation may change time to time, but post-Soviet space is something else, where Russia sees as a very privileged area of interest. But we also have to bear in mind the naval dominance of Russia in the Black Sea in the very short and the medium term will create direct or indirect security threats to Turkey. So also this Black Sea region, or changing military structure of the Black Sea region, this was not something that we have been covering for a very long time, or we have been loudly talking about this. But in the short or middle term, we may look for this changing dynamics of the region, because those two, Turkey and Russia, are definitely very key players in the region, may work for stability, but also may create instability. So this is going to be another topic for researchers, analysts to observe closely. Let me finish by saying that I hope I used my time properly.
Thank you very much. It was very, very good, very interesting, Dr. Özdal. Now I'll give the floor to Professor Kardash. We've heard Dr. Özdal regarding Russian-Turkey relations and how the Ukraine war is affecting their position in Eurasia, and what is the situation regarding Turkish relations with other Asian powers like Iran, China, India? How does the war affect Turkey's view of Asia?
Thank you, Ioannis. After this wonderful overview by Habibe, I mean, you left the easy part for me. No, I'm just joking. Actually, this is rather the difficult part, more about the projections. I mean, in terms of the background, the theme of our program today, I would love to share a couple of my own assessments, observations, and then if you allow me, I may try to respond to the questions you just raised, posed for us for discussion today. I mean, this Eurasianism, the relationship of a Eurasianist vision of Turkish foreign policy to Turkey's foreign policy or strategic identity, these are, of course, topics of relevance, which we have been debating for many years, and we will listen to Suat Bey later, I believe. My own take on that question when it comes to Turkey's strategic identity, personally, I have always emphasized this strategic autonomy quest for strategic autonomy as a defining element of Turkey's foreign conduct, international orientation. So in that sense, when it comes to specific orientations, be it a Western orientation or an Eastern orientation, a Eurasianist orientation, I think still these are secondary to this perception of strategic autonomy, which is deeply shaping the Turkish foreign policy strategic elite. So in that sense, I would argue that both Western orientation and Eurasian orientation in the Turkish context is not much about identity, but it is rather a kind of instrumental element of Turkey's foreign orientation. You remember, for instance, when we used to have these discussions about anti-Americanism, you have this great article. It has been quite a long time now, more than a decade, where you argued that this is not an inbuilt, inherent identity related, but rather it is a kind of political expression of a certain political position. So the anti-Americanism in the Turkish political context. So the Eurasianism is also, I think, similar in the sense that it is not necessarily related to an identity, but it is secondary. So in that sense, we need to rather look at ebbs and flows in Turkey's foreign orientation. So to some extent, Habibe also referred to those changes, to what extent the Turkey-Russia rapprochement in the last decade or 2 decades are instrumental or not. I also think in a similar way. So we have to look at the dynamics of Turkey's relationship with the West and Eurasian context, not in terms of too much identity. I think it in terms of rather conjectural geopolitical, geostrategic changes. So this brings us, of course, to today's discussion, and then especially the fact that we are discussing this interesting topic in the midst of an unfolding major crisis, war, which nobody was hoping to happen, but it did happen. And as many people are arguing now, it is a kind of a wake-up call, a geopolitical wake-up call, and it is forcing many of international actors, stakeholders to confront with some of the essential bare strategic questions which they were and they have been postponing today. And some of these questions were already out there, but many of them, Western powers especially, instead tried to prefer more benign interpretations of the international environment. But since 2014, the discussions about Russian revisionism, what it means, to what extent it can go, and mount a challenge to not only the European security architecture, but also the entire international order. So those questions, big questions, the arguments we have been discussing, the jungle grows back, geopolitics comes back, return of history. So they are not hypothetical anymore. They are a reality. They are shaping the agenda, strategic agenda, and nobody has at this point luxury to escape from that reality. And many of us have awakened to that reality. And now all the discussions about the future will have to be based on this new reality, the unfolding reality, and how different strategic actors will read this unfolding new international environment and will devise their policies accordingly. So in that sense, making a plausible prediction about how things may unfold for Turkey or for other countries is very risky. And then we should really underline it, because things may go in different directions depending on the evolution of the events on the ground, but also the choices of the actors. As we have seen, what's happening in Ukraine, by deciding to invade Ukraine, Russia triggered a lot of counter reactions, counterbalancing dynamics, and it is going to lead to a set of reactions by other actors. And now those reactions also produce their own counter reactions. So in that sense, we are living in this fluid environment. And some people may say we are back to the Cold War. No, it's a containment. So I don't want to name what it is, because it is a transition phase. It's a change of time, altering of times, and then the parameters of this new international security environment and regional environment, and what they mean what they mean for Turkey will be clearer over the next years. So at this point, you ask me, despite all these objections, make some predictions. And here are a couple of observations that I can share. I mean, I think we should put on the table what we know for certain and what we can predict, what we can speculate on. From a Turkish point of view, of course, my assessment will be more related to how I see things may unfold for Turkey in the coming years, in the Eurasian context, perhaps to a certain extent, of course, the Middle Eastern context. As I just said earlier, some of the delayed, postponed strategic questions, they are now on the agenda. The transition of the international system, the US commitment to this neoliberal international orders, the principles underpinning it. So this discussion will be acutely taking place. And then it raises the bigger question, which you also emphasized, as this is the theme which also triggered your project in the first place, the power transition at the global level. So this will also be, I think, more and more visible in our discussions. And as part of this power transition, the so-called great power competition, how the great powers will face each other, how they will confront each other. These will be the dominant themes in the coming years. And for Turkey, what it means. So for Turkey, the way I personally have been always defining Turkey, I see it as a regional power with a desire for regional autonomy. So in that sense, the way I see a regional power is it is a power that sits at the intersection of its own regional context, but also at the global level. So in that sense, it is subject to the pressures, challenges, and opportunities coming from both from within the region, but from the international systemic level as well. So in that sense, I think that transitional phase will be putting big pressures on Turkey, which was also highlighted by Habibe earlier. So in this new phase, what we know, what I can say for Turkey, I think there will be a continuation of some of the themes of Turkey's foreign policy, which were shaping the Turkish foreign policy agenda in the last couple of years. The desire for strategic autonomy will be there. This dualistic attitude toward the West, when it comes to cooperation and competition, when it comes to necessarily challenging or not, it will be definitely there. It won't disappear. You won't see a kind of immediate coming back to the Western fault kind of scenario, which is advocated by some experts, analysts. So Turkey will maintain the same dualistic approach when it comes to West, especially the Western engagement in its own neighborhoods. So this hard power turn, which we were talking about, especially after 2015 or so, and then the normalization agenda in the last 1.5 years, the toning down of certain regional tensions, de-escalation led some people to predict that we have reached the limits and end of the hard power era. Personally, I didn't buy into such arguments, but this new phase, in a sense, retroactively speaking, adds a new justification for the hard power turn in Turkish foreign policy, and I think it will continue to pursue similar hard power related instruments. We will seek to embolden its hard power capacity and will not be hesitant to employ coercive diplomacy and other tools in the coming years. And then when it comes to the relationship between Turkey and Russia, briefly here, and then I will move to my speculations part about China, India. I don't want to go too much details on these questions, Yanis. So with Russia, I guess right now for Turkey, the biggest challenge is to learn, to know, to develop ways to live with a new Russia. It has already been challenging, the revisionist Russia, and Turkey has developed its own ways to manage those challenges, and the accommodation, some people may call it differently, but I have been arguing that strategically Turkey made a deliberate policy to some extent, maybe out of necessity, to develop a strategic relationship of dependency on certain contexts. Of course, in certain areas, there was also a challenge to Russia. Turkey did not refrain from confronting in some areas. But in the last several years, after Georgia 2008 and after 2014, Turkey deliberately developed this policy to manage the challenges posed by revisionist or neo-revisionist Russia. But now the reality is different. Russian revisionism has also taken a new turn. And some experts are calling now Russia may go beyond a revisionist power into becoming a kind of rogue state. But in any case, what we can say, irrespective of how the current conflict evolves, we don't know when it may be terminated, under what terms, but the ongoing Western policy, the sanctions policy, their fallout, the secondary sanctions that may go even after the conflict, so on and so forth. So then we see a kind of decaying Russia, which will be a big challenge to Turkey in especially overlapping neighborhoods in the Black Sea, as Habibe mentioned, Caucasus and Central Asian context. And we will also see how Russia will react to this decay. As we know from history of great power wars, transitions, declining powers may prefer to retrench. They may maintain their overextension, which may create its own problems. So we don't know. These are big questions, and I think in many ways, one of the big number one strategic challenges for Turkey in coming years is to live with this new Russia, which is facing an enormous international reaction, pushback, and how to live with this new Russia will be a big challenge. So here, coming back to your questions about what it means for Turkey's relations with other Asian powers, another thing that is likely to continue is this new reorientation of Turkey toward Asia, as it was titled, the Asia-Asia policy has been up there. I think for the last couple of years, Turkey has been trying to put big capital in this new orientation. And most of the time, we were looking at it as a way to counter China's own Asia policy, sort of to create its own Asia policy to make it sure that it won't come under the domination of China. But with this new phase, I think Turkey will continue to invest in this Asia orientation or reorientation. It may open up new avenues, but new challenges as well, especially considering how Russia will react to the pushback from the West. Maybe Russia may return inward. Maybe Russia may redirect its energy to Caucasus, Central Asia. So these may create big challenges for Turkey. But here, another important question that we need to answer is how China itself will position itself in this new orientation, international orientation, the power transition framework. Most actors, most analysts looked at China, right, as the most likely challenger for the United States. So far, we see that they are playing smart in this conflict. They are not taking a clear sides. They are also trying to act really cautiously to avoid any fallout. So I think in the coming years, if China maintains the same orientation of playing it really safe, carefully, cautiously, the potential Turkish-Chinese relationship is likely to be enhanced, deepened. It will continue. I don't see any reason why it shouldn't. Not necessarily as part of an identity narrative, as part of some Asianism or anti-Westernism, but as a bare strategic reasoning. Turkey will probably seek to deepen the ongoing ties with China in coming years as well. On India, I really don't want to comment much on that. I don't see much from Turkey and all these nuances. Turkey is deepening militarized relationship with Pakistan, Turkey's policy on Afghanistan. So what they mean for India, we know some of the parameters are there. I don't know how India will position itself in this new phase, but probably the same limited relationship with India and based on the existing parameters is likely to continue. Here I can stop, and of course I will be happy to advance my arguments if there are any points that are not clear enough at this point. Thank you, Ioannis, again.
Thank you very much, Shaban, for a very comprehensive presentation. These were very interesting and very important points. I'll immediately pass the floor to Suat Kınıklıoğlu, who will also share his perspective with us. I know that he has been recently authoring a paper on Eurasianism. So I would like to ask him to reflect on the main findings of this paper in reference to the discussion we have here. So in that respect, how much of Eurasianism in Turkey is reflecting the shifting trends of international politics and the the rise of Asia as a focal point of global politics? And how much does this reflect domestic political dynamic? This is something we haven't discussed, so I would like to hear your input into that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ioannis. It's good to be with Habibe and Shaban, and of course with you. Let me point out that my paper on Eurasianism, which is hopefully going to come out soon, is primarily focusing more on the domestic dimension of it. I think the Eurasianism discussion was more popular in 2015, 2016, but thanks to the wisdom of President Putin, now the issue, and going into Ukraine, now the issue is back in. Actually, the way the invasion of Ukraine has been covered in the Turkish media, especially how commentators, former generals, some media personalities have been interpreting what is going on the field, has shown quite a bit of a pro-Russian tilt in interpreting events on the ground. And this actually has confirmed my findings in my report, that I believe Russia has very smartly invested in social media, traditional media personalities. Sputnik Turkey has 1 million followers in Turkey and is now banned in many countries, but continues to influence the Turkish debate. I wouldn't call it only Eurasianist, but you see pro-Chinese, pro-Russian tendencies. Of course, the Istanbul group, which is the sort of most well-known Eurasianist actor in the domestic setting. Of course, the Vatan Party, Mr. Perinçek and his party. There is it's not a homogeneous group of people. It's actually I classify Turkey's Eurasianists as a subgroup of the Ulusalcıs, which is these leftist, patriotic or nationalist larger group that is actually disseminated both in a large segment of Turkish electorate, including the CHP, MHP, and maybe others, of whom many describe themselves as Ulusalcı. And I think the Eurasianists are a subgroup of that, a smaller group for sure. That said, my findings found that especially in the immediate aftermath of the release of the Ergenekon and Balyoz trial, people, including many former military personalities, I think Eurasianism was quite popular as they just got out of prison and were re-energized by coming back into the Turkish political scene. Of course, then Mr. Perinçek's unofficial part in the ruling coalition, the media group's position on Turkish domestic politics confirmed their unofficial coalition partner status within Turkey. But of course, there are many other groups that we define as Eurasian. It's not only limited to the Vatan Party or Aydınlık group. There are also, to lesser degrees, other groups which I have outlined in my report. But what needs to be registered for our discussion today is, in my view, Russia and China obviously are very cognizant of Turkey's strategic value, of the geostrategic value of the geography itself. As Shaban said, in Davutoğlu terminology, Turkey is at the intersecting, Turkey is intersecting a number of regions, the Balkans, the Black Sea, the Caucasus, the Eastern Mediterranean. And there is no doubt that both China and Russia invested in the last decade, if not more, in providing, in influencing the Turkish public debate. And the deterioration of relations between Turkey and the United States, especially around the coup attempt in 2016, and as well the perception that the United States is aiding the PKK, PYD, YPG in northern Syria has obviously had a huge impact on the domestic perception towards the United States. Of course, the EU drive, as we know, has already been on hold for many, many years. But again, President Erdogan's very smart articulation of Europe not willing to take in more refugees from Syria, Turkey having a moral high ground by hosting almost 5 million refugees in Turkey. So, there is, of course, if you look at the history of when Turkey's relations with Russia improve, and when do Turkey's relations now recently, of course, with China improve, it's always at times when relations with the West do deteriorate. Now, this, of course, also overlaps with both speakers mentioned the urge for strategic autonomy in Turkey, which is, I think it's beyond the government or the ruling coalition. I think in general, overall, the Turkish body politic is very much pro-independence. And although we live in an extremely interdependent and globalized world, still on the rhetoric level, for sure, Turkey does not want to put all its eggs into the same basket, which is a smart policy given the geography where we are in. But I think my view, and I have underlined this in my report as well, I think Turkey has unnecessarily created too much interdependency with Russia, which limits its room of maneuver. I think the Turkish political elite, especially the governing elite, also thought the West is in a serious decline, both in moral values, but also as far as economic power or influence in the world, that the post-World War II order is no longer solid, and that many countries, and especially Russia, as we have seen 2008 in Georgia, 2014 in Crimea, are breaching the norms of the international order, and that the West is actually helpless in confronting it. So, but interestingly, Ukraine, I would say the leadership of President Zelensky, and of course the very strong resistance that the Ukrainian people are showing at the moment to combat this invasion, excuse me, has probably precipitated some second thoughts on in Ankara. And coming to, I think, the question of the invasion and how Turkey has handled, I think Turkey has handled this crisis very well until now. It has, in 3 dimensions, I think, immediately affected the ongoing crisis by providing the Bayraktar TB2 to Ukraine prior to the invasion. I think Turkey has clearly taken a pro-Ukrainian stance. With the Antalya Diplomacy Forum, I think the highest level of engagement between the two sides at the level of foreign ministers has taken place. Yes, everyone knew nothing would come out of the meeting, but the fact is that Turkey brought them together, and it was a Turkish foreign minister in the sitting in between them. So on the diplomatic level, I think Turkey has also struck some good points. And then, of course, Turkey stands on the Montreux Convention and the Straits. I think on these 3 areas, we see direct Turkish impact on the ground. But I found unfortunate that some people close to President Erdogan felt the need to fly to Moscow and explain that the TB2 was sold without knowing that the Ukrainians would actually use them, which was rather funny and immature, I thought, but anyway, that happened as well. But I think for Turkey, I think the most important point out of the Ukrainian invasion is that regardless of who runs Ankara and under what condition, in terms of human rights, democracy, freedom of expression, that the sheer real estate value of Turkey, which is a term that many Americans use, real estate value, the sheer real estate value makes it almost impossible for any European or Western power to disengage with Turkey. And I think the invasion of Ukraine and the ongoing war has again reiterated and underscored that regardless of what's happening inside Turkey, that Turkey's real estate value, the sheer fact that Turkey has, can interpret the Montreux Convention and can actually determine and influence the amount of warships in and out of the Black Sea. I think huge developments in the defense industry, which we've seen with the Bayraktar TB2 drone, also again shows that Turkey has had an impact in providing hard power to the country that is being invaded. So to cut the long story short, my view is Turkish Eurasianism is an ideology that is primarily geared towards domestic purposes. Its impact is more domestic. It actually legitimizes many ultra-nationalist policies, brings it more mainstream, and it also allows the ruling coalition's nationalist foreign policy to be accepted by audiences that normally are not under the influence of the coalition, mostly secular audiences, be they ulusalcı or be they Eurasianists. Of course, Eurasianists in Turkey favor an authoritarian order. They prefer a strong state. That strong state happens to be under the control of President Erdogan. Both are united in anti-hegemonic view of the world. That means the one that is anti-Western. And if you look at, which I entertained a bit in my paper as well, if you look at the ideological backgrounds, it's the Atilla İlhan on the left and it's the Necip Fazıl on the right, who both argue for a unique, local, yerli ve milli, authentic civilization, culture, and outlook. And I think the overlapping of Islamism or conservatism in Turkey with that of the Eurasianists, which both favor a strong state, both are anti-hegemonic against the West, not only in terms of power, but also in terms of morals. If you look at Putin's Russia, gay rights, LGBT, all of that, is not touchable. You see that also here in Turkey with the Istanbul Convention being cancelled, all of these sort of moral aspects to it as well. And of course, both Russia and Turkey are post-imperial countries, although Russia wants to revive it now, but it will find out the hard way that this is not going to happen. But both share the view that the projection of military power is a legitimate extension of foreign policy. Both feel that their neighborhood areas can be articulated in this imperial discourse. You see this also in Turkey, where these TV shows, soap operas, and all kinds of what we call in Turkish societal engineering, where consent is being manufactured to have large audiences agree to the ongoing policies that articulate the Ottoman sphere. I think I spoke too long, so let me stop here.
Thank you very much, Suat. These were very important contributions to our discussion. Let's start with a question and answer session. We have about 15 minutes until the end of our webinar. And I will introduce some questions I've been collecting. One question refers to the asymmetry of the relationship between Russia and Turkey and how this can be addressed, or what are the risks of this asymmetry if it becomes consolidated in the future. And let me add a point to this, because we keep on talking about how Europe and Germany have become dependent on Russian natural gas, and this to some degree limits the ability of Europe to take kind of swift action against Russia's invasion in Ukraine. On the other hand, Turkey is also dependent on Russian natural gas, but Turkey has also made the decision to allow the construction of its nuclear power plant by Russians. So to some degree, even if we kind of move to the new age whereby renewables are going to be replacing natural gas or hydrocarbons in the energy mix, like Russia will still be present and very influential in the Turkish energy market. So how can we comment on that? Can this relationship be readjusted on Turkey's side, or will Russia be like resistant in violent or direct ways into recalibration of this relationship? Habibe, what do you think?
Well, yeah, let me try to answer. And also, I just maybe time to time I may address several points both Şaban Hoca and Suat Bey actually mentioned, and I believe they are quite important, and I didn't really mention. Regarding to the asymmetry, to be honest, the asymmetrical interdependence is the one of the soft belly. I'm a Turkish academic, so I am looking at Turkey-Russia relations from the Turkish perspective, and I found it quite asymmetrical indeed, which is in favor of Russia. It is not only in economy, by the way. Yes, economic aspect is definitely one of them, but bearing in mind that Turkey mostly buys oil and gas, but on the other hand, do you sell like vegetables, some chemicals? This asymmetry is sort of inevitable on the one hand. And some also, when I come up with that criticism, some also address the issue that you have to also calculate the Russian tourists, the income actually they do support, Turkish investors in Russia. Yes, I do expect we may indeed see then this economic interdependence asymmetry may lower a little bit more, but still this asymmetry is not just and only in economics. But when we compare the nature of relations, what I do see is from the very beginning, while Turkish policymakers are very eager to invest on relations with Russia, I do see Russian perspective on Turkey to be more realistic, more skeptical, and more balanced. I never see Russian scholar, journalists, politicians to talk about Turkey relations with Turkey in terms of strategic partnership or an alliance. Rather, I do hear this sort of, let me say, very positive comments on Turkey, which is not that much balanced. So this asymmetry is also in political insecurity terms. Also, I believe Turkey is so much cooperating or relying on Russia, while I don't see that much respect or, let me say, consideration of Russian policies when it comes to specific issues. I don't see Russia that much considers Turkey's national interest. But of course, that happens, that shift in Turkish foreign policy happens in light with the deteriorating relations with the United States. So therefore, Russian position may not be that critical. US support for the PYD, for example, created a huge problem, but never actually we raised the issue that Russia also supports PYD. So this actually shows us, the asymmetrical nature in different manners. Another manner is, as Suat Bey very well mentioned, I believe in information area, in media, Russia also has an upper hand to shape public opinion in Turkey with Sputnik. I am, previously I did some research on what sort of media coverage Sputnik Turkey do have in Turkish public opinion. To be honest, in Russia, Turkish media doesn't really have that sort of a tool to shape Russian public opinion. So this asymmetry, we are much I mean, usually we do elaborate on economics, but I believe it's more than economics. We may not call it asymmetrical in every aspect, but what I see is Russian dominance in military, in security, in economics, in political spectrum is increasing for the, at the cost of Turkey's interests. So there is a need for readdressing from Turkish perspective. Russia is a very important regional player. Russia is a very important partner for Turkey. I will always address Russia, as that sort of state. So relations with Russia are important. I'm not suggesting to, ignore relations with Russia, but readdressing those relations are crucial because, as Shabuno just mentioned in a very important manner, this is a new Russia now, more militarily aggressive, revisionist, and it doesn't only challenge international system, it challenges international system, but it starts from the region. So therefore, I believe more balanced, maybe a little bit more within the West, more balanced approach is a need. But I don't know whether this can be done in a very short time of a period, because political leaderships, present Erdogan and President Putin's relations, political leaderships, they are very strong, connection is very strong. I am a bit cautious whether this readdressing bilateral relations in a more symmetrical manner, it is not an easy task, but I hope for that. Some suggest that the current development, I mean, invasion of Ukraine, Russian military aggression, can create a room, an opportunity, a window of opportunity for Turkey to stand once again closer to West. And Suat Bey just mentioned this Turkey's real estate value, looking from the United States. I'm a bit cautious here to understand whether this is going to be like 2013 readmission agreement of European Union, pragmatic, opportunistic, very short-term vision, or whether this is going to bring us a new white page with full of opportunities to readdress, re-strengthen this Turkish relations with West in a more institutional way. So I hope for it, but we will see. I'm a little bit cautious. So I didn't just only answer the question, but also I added some additional points I just wanted to mention. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was very, very good. Shaban, we have a question for you. We talked about security in Asia, and there is an organization that used to attract a lot of attention in Turkey, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, that sometimes used to be presented as an alternative to the EU by Turkish leaders, right? What do you think is the impact of the war in Ukraine on the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and Turkey's view of it?
I think the Turkish history with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization really is a good proof of some of the arguments me and other speakers made earlier, the extent to which Eurasianism is not really a deep inherent orientation, but rather a conjectural, instrumental tool that can serve the needs at a particular juncture. I mean, so far, when we look at its involvement in the crisis, Russia-Ukraine crisis, so it is not acting as a power multiplier for Russia, right? So the way the Shanghai Cooperation Organization served, when Russia is under this international reaction, Western reaction, it is not emerging as a platform on which Russia can build a counter balancing platform. So I think this will really shed important questions, doubts about the viability and relevance of that platform in Turkey. And as a matter of fact, for Turkey, as I said, I mean, there was always talk about it, observer status, so on and so forth, but it wasn't necessarily the real orientation. It was more tactical, instrumental, and especially if you remember the recent Turkish moves, the Asia-Asia, and this new organization to upgrade the Turkic states, Turkish-speaking states, into more of an interstate body. It shows that for Turkey, when it comes to Eurasia, Shanghai Cooperation Organization will not be something that's at the very center of its policy there. So I haven't seen and I haven't talked to anybody how they read it, but this is my assessment at this point.
Thank you very, very much. And one last question, since we're running out of time, to Suat. Suat, you mentioned how Eurasianists in Turkey have been looking into relations with Russia, relations with the West. My question is related to the effect of the war in Ukraine, Russia's invasion in Ukraine, because Russia has been challenging at the same time with this war, both the international order also, as well as liberal values as well. Can we distinguish between the two? Can we see, for example, Eurasianists who seek an independent role for Turkey in global politics, but do support liberalism or democracy? Or do we have to conflate the two? Can we see them as separate, or they come together?
The Eurasianists in Turkey that I had the privilege, some of them, to interview, and the ones I met and spoke. On the discourse level, they all favor democracy. I mean, if you ask them, they want a democratic Turkey. But in reality, when you examine, in more detail what kind of domestic order they would favor, it looks more authoritarian, and one where the state's interests are defined by them. They obviously, I actually think, worship the state. They really worship the state, and but a state whose interests and its structure they would define. And sometimes, what, for instance, the current coalition's policies, like Mavi Vatan, for instance, where Eurasianists were utilized to fill a deficiency of cadre in the Islamist camp, but also a useful policy that worked well with the audiences, a very imaginative term, Mavi Vatan, who doesn't want a Vatan that is blue? So it worked well. But on your question, I have strong doubts about them wanting a domestic order where personal liberties are respected, where the separation of powers in normal rule of law, most importantly, rule of law is respected. As I said, on the discourse level, you see, all of them really, that they want a democracy. But when you look, a little bit more in detail, you actually see that what is desired is an authoritarian order with a strong state, where the primacy, the eminence of the state certainly trumps personal liberties of Turkish citizens. A year or two ago, or you might think that Eurasians are very small, marginal. Who cares about them? But I think if you followed, and I was fortunate to be in Turkey, when the invasion started, but when you follow how much influence, very disproportionate influence, by the way, in the media, so-called think tanks, kind of institutes, Russia Institute and all these things, all these things popping up, Haber Global, and, Tele One, for instance, you see all very effective and actually quite successful, given how clear, what is happening in Ukraine, that one country invades a UN member unprovoked, and all the carnage that we see on television and on our social media. But despite that, a very strong willingness to defend the Russian cause is, in my view, should be a cause of concern for Westerners who want to see Turkey still part of a wider Europe, or have a strong relationship with the European Union. So I think I will join those who define the war in Ukraine as a turning point in our short-term history. I would say I think we will have a new world. I think President Zelensky has the most unexpected actor to unite the West. Has actually been very successful. He has reminded global audiences about honorable leadership, where he was offered a way out of Kiev. And when he said to President Biden, "I don't need a ride, I need weapons to fight the enemy." So I think we might see a new world. And I think Turkey will, of course, adjust, because Turkey is not immune from all these larger tendencies in the international order. And be it under President Erdogan's leadership or another leadership next year when we have elections, I think Turkey will adjust to these larger trends. Well, the Eurasianists will probably continue to be part of the political debate. As I said, they are disproportionately represented in the media, in the social media, etc. And it is important to listen to them, what they say. But I think by and large, the quality of Turkey's relationship with the West will define the fortune of Turkey's Eurasianists in the domestic setting.
Thank you very much, Suat. We've come to the end of our webinar. I would like to thank all three of our speakers, Dr. Habibe Özdal, Professor Shaban Kardash, and Suat Kınıklıoğlu, for their very valuable contributions. I think we had a very, very good discussion. Let me also thank the Center for Applied Turkish Studies, whose contribution made this webinar and the webinar series in general possible. I would like to also thank our colleagues at Medyascope for our collaboration, and I look forward to the next webinar of our webinar series. Please stay tuned, and thank you very much once again.
Thank you.
Thank you.